So when I was choosing the topic of the lecture, I was reading one thing, another thing, and I had in my mind that I would like to go into the medium's book and talk about something that was in there. And then I found this chapter about haunted places. And it coincidentally came with the fall and the approaching of the Halloween that we have here, and it's hugely celebrated. We know that. And then haunted places actually become a very important topic in all the media, right? It's TVs and everywhere. There are in Vancouver, and I believe you can do like tourism with stories about haunted places and all that. So it does intrigue a lot the imaginary side of people, and people actually are very curious about the haunted places. So this image that I have first, you can see the Fairmont Hotel. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but there is a ghost that lives in the Fairmont Hotel. Have you heard about it? No? So it's called the Lady in Red. So it is said that there is a lady in red that appears on the windows of the 14th floor. And people sometimes see her. It doesn't matter if it's at night or at day. And it is said that sometimes the elevator stops on the 14th floor without anyone pushing the button. So it is said to be a ghost. And actually, it's a very interesting story because it is said to be a good ghost. It's what they believe in the hotel, and they named a cocktail after her. So they keep like it's a very good companion. So they just hold it dear to their hearts, and that's the story. And of course, I think it attracts even more tourists to their hotel. There are other places in Vancouver that are famous for having ghosts around. I don't know if you've been to the Old Spaghetti Factory in Gastown. So it is said that they see a train conductor sometimes seated on the train of that restaurant. And there are others that appear in there. So there are many stories, and even the station where there's sea bus right now, it is said to be haunted as well. So I decided to talk a little bit about it, but mostly because I was able to find it in the Medium's book. So for those who are interested, most of my lecture is from this chapter. It's chapter 9, part 2 from the Medium's book. And this is because it's one of the things that I really like about Kardec. It's that for him, there is no silly question. And he never thought that there was no question that he had that the spirits wouldn't answer, or that would not deserve an answer. So he decided to ask about this. Well, there are stories about haunted places. Let's talk to the spirits. I have questions. Let's make the questions. So at the beginning of the chapter, he briefly presents that spontaneous manifestations, which have occurred in all times, and the persistence of some spirits in giving ostensible evidence of their presence in certain localities, are the source of the belief in haunted places. The following spirit answers were elicited by our questions on this subject. So to start, Kardec asks, do spirits attach themselves to persons only, or do they also attach themselves to things? So in here, he tries to bring it to a broader idea of things that being. Maybe it's not the house, maybe it's the table, right? Maybe it's something in the house, maybe it's something valuable in the house, or somewhere else, something valuable somewhere else. So the spirits answer, that depends upon their elevation. Certain spirits may attach themselves to terrestrial objects. Misers, for instance, who have hidden their hoards and who are not sufficiently dematerialized, may still watch over and guard them. So the spirits are clear answering, yes, it is possible, right? Especially for certain less developed spirits, if they're too attached to matter, they can't be attached to things. Are there any places for which errant spirits have a predilection? And the spirits answer, spirits who are no longer earthbound go where they find those whom they love, for they are attracted rather by persons than by material things. Some of them may for a time retain a preference for certain places, but those who do so are spirits of inferior advancement. So in here, Kardec brings this predilection for places, especially because there are tendencies, if we study all tales of ghosts that are in haunted places, there is a tendency of them being related to certain places. For example, a cemetery or some ruins or no buildings, abandoned buildings and things like that. But the spirits are clear that usually the spirits will go after other spirits, either they be incarnated or discarnated, but the ones that are dear to these spirits. And the ones that are, as they said before, so the less developed spirits that are too attached to matter can have a preference for places, but they are then inferior. And then it's very interesting because then Kardec asks the inevitable question. So since the attachment of spirits for localities is a sign of inferiority, is it also a proof that they are evil spirits? And the spirits answer, surely not. A spirit may be but little advanced and yet not be a bad spirit. It is not so among men. So this is very much related to many of the haunted places story and what we see in the movies, what they like to do movies about. These haunted places is usually evil spirits. And because we keep saying, it's an inferior spirit, it's an inferior spirit, it's an inferior spirit, it can lead us to think that they're evil. And those two things are not correlated. They can be just inferior and not bad. And they clearly, like the spirits are very, they don't like to spend too many words. They're very brief and very clear in like, do you not see how it works among men? Like, do you believe that the more knowledgeable people are always better than the less knowledgeable people? So why would that be different if spirits are but us, right? And us, we are spirits. So there's obviously no correlation in between the two. Is there any foundation for the belief that spirits frequent ruins by preference? No, spirits go to such places just as they go everywhere else. But the lugubrious aspect of certain places strikes the human imagination and leads you to attribute to the presence of spirits what is often merely a natural effect. How often does fear turn the shadow of a tree into a phantom, or mistake the cry of an animal, or the murmuring of the wind for the wail of a ghost. Spirits like the presence of man and usually seek out inhabited places rather than solitary ones. So according to the spirits, it's easier to find other discarnated spirits or ghosts within the presence of man and not on abandoned places because they like the presence of man. And there's a part that I did not add here that Kardec says, but there are all sorts of spirits, and there can be a spirit that has a preference for being in solitude. And the spirit says, yes, this can happen as well. If this spirit was hermit or someone that likes to be isolated, this can happen, but it's not the most common case, right? So Kardec asks, popular beliefs have generally a foundation of truth. What is the origin of the belief in haunted places? And he mentions here, then later as what is called a white lady, that I did not put in here, but if you go to Google and try to search for the white lady, you will find the white lady in all sorts of countries. There's Japan in there, they have a legend of white lady. In Brazil, there's a white lady. In North America, there's a white lady. Yeah, there's a story of a white lady everywhere. And each one of them have a different explanation of the origin of this white lady, but it's widespread. So what Kardec means here is that haunted places is everywhere. Like the belief in haunted places is everywhere. It's widespread and it's common throughout nature. So yes, of course it has a source that must be true because it is widespread. But where does it come from? And then the spirits answer, it has grown out of man's instinctive belief in spirit manifestations, a belief that has prevailed in all ages of the world. But as I said just now, the aspect of lugubrious places strikes the imagination, and men have naturally located in such places the beings whom they have regarded as supernatural. This superstitious belief is upheld by the fanciful imaginings of your poets, as well as by the nonsensical stories told to you in the nursery. So in here they say it is a mix. It comes from this belief in spirits and spirit manifestations, and actually many times it might come from a true manifestation of the spirits. But then a lot has been added to it, especially when we try to profit and when we try to make people curious about. And I say like all of us here from Brazil, we know that sometimes we tell stories to scare kids and prevent them from doing things that we don't want them to do. And sometimes this kind of stories, they are created for some other reasons, or things are a little bit deviated or increased in importance or in size. So this is what happens. Stories are created about it, and every tale brings it a little bit further and different from the original source of the belief. Spirits who assemble together, have they any preferences in regard to days and hours of meeting? This is a question that I think it's very valuable for the Spiritist meetings that we see, and as well for the time of Kardec, when turning tables were happening and there were many, many different groups trying to get manifestation from the spirit. So all different things were happening at that time. from fake manifestations to true manifestations, and all sorts of environments and people that were trying to get those manifestations. So he asked that to be clear about, is there a certain date that is favorable, or should we group and try to get a manifestation always the same time? Does it have to be in the evening or anything like that? And the Spirit says, no, days and hours are measurements of time for the use of men and for the needs of corporeal life. Spirits have no need of any such measurements and take very little heed of them. So for the spirits, actually, it doesn't really matter. Then Kardec asks, what is the origin of the idea that spirits come by preference at night? Because most of the stories place ghosts or spirits at night in certain places. That's why I like the Fairmont Hotel's story, because they're clear in saying that no, there is no preference in time, there's nothing. But in many times, especially if you go to the stories that try to place ghosts on cemetery, it will be at night. And then the spirits answer, the impression produced on the imagination by darkness and silence. So that's where it comes from. When you are at night, usually it's quiet, it's dark, and that brings up imagination, but it is easier to hear the sounds of nature or other sounds that are not human noises. So that's where it comes from. All such ideas are superstitions that a rational knowledge of Spiritism will destroy. It is the same with respect to the notion, held by some people, that certain days and hours are more propitious than others. The influence of midnight has no existence except in storybooks. Then Kardec continues, if this be the case, how is it that many spirits announce their arrival and manifestations for midnight, or for certain predetermined days, as Fridays, for example? Then the spirits answer, such spirits only trifle with their credulity. In the same way, there are spirits who declare themselves to be the devil, or give themselves some other diabolical or fantastic name. Show them that you are not to be taken in by them, and you will hear no more of such absurdities. So usually, if it is a serious manifestation, if it is a serious spirit, there will be no talk about preference for a day or for night or for midnight, right? Do spirits come back by preference to the burial place of their body? This is a kind way of Kardec to ask, is there any truth in believing that cemeteries are a propitious place for manifestations? Then the spirits answer, the body was but a garment. They care no more for their fleshy envelope, in which they have had to suffer, than the prisoner cares for his chains. The memory of those they love is the only thing they value. Because the spirits answer, well, no, it's not the place, it's the person, right? If you were there in the cemetery and the spirit is following you, you may see the spirit there, but the preference is for the person. So Kardec continues and asks, so are prayers offered up at their graves especially pleasing to them, and do they attract them more than prayers would do elsewhere? Because of this habit that we have of going to the cemetery to look at their graves and pray for them there. So the spirits answer, prayer is an evocation which attracts a spirit, as you know. The more fervent and sincere the prayer, the greater the effect it produces, and therefore the sight of a venerated tomb may serve to concentrate the thought of him who prays, while the interest attached to it, as to any other treasured relic, being a testimony of affection offered to the spirit, he is always attracted and touched thereby. But in all such cases, it is the thought which acts on a spirit and not any material objects. For these have less influence on the spirit who is prayed for than on the person who prays and whose attention they serve to concentrate and intensify. So what they say here is, well, it might be easier just because the person goes to the cemetery, isolates themselves from all the world surrounding them, look at the grave and focus and bring up those memories and makes a gesture of offering something. Sometimes it may be a flower or any other relic, but it helps the person praying to focus on that spirit. So that's why in such cases, it may be easier to attract the spirit in there, just because of the person who is praying and not exactly the spirit. It's the person praying gets a pure focus on the spirit in there. If you're good enough to be able to focus elsewhere, it will happen anywhere else if you are able to do the same thing. So just to help the person pray. That being the case, the belief in haunted places would appear to be not absolutely groundless. After everything the spirit said, well, so isn't it like nonsense at all, the stories of haunted places? Then the spirits answered, we have told you that there are spirits who are attracted by material things. Such spirits may also be attracted to certain places and may even take up their abode in them until the cessation of the circumstances that have attracted them thither. And then Kardec asked, so what are the circumstances that may attract spirits to a given place? Their sympathy with persons who frequent that place, and in some cases, the desire to communicate with them. Their motives, however, are not always so praiseworthy. Inferior spirits may desire to revenge themselves on persons against whom they have a grudge. Sojourn in a fixed locality may be also a punishment inflicted on them, especially if they have committed a crime there, so that the crime may be constantly before their eyes. So in this part, the spirits say, okay, even though spirits most of the time have preferences towards people or other spirits or other persons, and an inferior spirit that's attached to matter is not necessarily evil. Sometimes there can be a case when a spirit is attached to a place because there was a crime committed there. So they say, even though it's not common, it can happen. And they said, for example, if you were not looking, if a haunted place, for example, is inhabited, the spirit might be there searching for the people that are there. We can't be sure. If it is an abandoned place, the spirit might be attached to the place itself. So in here, I'm gonna just take a brief time to talk about one case that was described in Heaven and Hell, about such spirit that was actually attached to a place. This story is both, so I brought only a part of that story from Heaven and Hell because it is a little bit long. And it is even longer on the Spirit's Review. If you'd like, if you're interested, then I can send it to you later, which is the chapter and how to find it. But in the Spirit's Review, there's the whole conversation when they evoke the Spirit. The whole different, there were different sessions, and it's all described in there. In Heaven and Hell is a little bit summarized. There's a selection of special questions or sessions that they had. And I'm going to bring even a more summarized part of this story. So this story is the story of the spirit of the Castelnaudary. This is from Heaven and Hell, the part 2nd and chapter 6, Repentant Spirits. And this image is an image from Castelnaudary because I was always curious to, what is the city like? So this is the small town of Castelnaudary. So what happened in this place? There was a small house near Castelnaudary that was the scene of strange noises and various manifestations that caused it to be regarded as being haunted by some evil genius. On this account, it was exorcised in 1848, but without effect. The owner, Mr. D, having determined to occupy it, died suddenly after some years of occupation. His son, who next occupied it, on entering one of the rooms, received a vigorous slap from an unseen hand. As he was alone at that time, he could not doubt that the slap had been given by some occult being, and he at once quitted the house, in which, according to local tradition, a great crime was formerly committed. So this house had a story of a crime committed in there in the past. Then Mr. D decided to occupy the house, died suddenly, passed it to his son. His son moved in there and then received a slap on the face and then decided to move away. So from this story, the spirit who gave the slap, so the Spirit Society in Paris, in 1859, they decided to evoke the spirit who gave the slap without knowing a name or anything. So the spirit manifested its presence by various acts of violence. All the efforts made to calm him were thrown away. St. Louis was questioned on the subject and replied, "It is a spirit of the worst kind, a veritable monster. We have made him come, but we have not been able to make him right, notwithstanding all that had been said to him. The unhappy wretch has his free will, and a sad use he makes of it." To our question whether he was susceptible to improvement, St. Louis replied, "Why should he not be? Are not all spirits improvable, this one like all others? You must expect, however, to find the task a difficult one. But however great his perversity, the rendering of good for evil will influence him in time. Begin by praying for him, and a month after evoke him again. You can then judge of the change that will have taken place in him." So then the same spirit was actually evoked several times, right? And this part they mentioned when they evoked again a month later, he showed himself much more tractable. Then by degrees they mean by each different evocation they had to make, he showed himself submissive and repentant. From the information given about him, partly by himself, partly by other spirits, we ascertained that in 1608, he lived in the house alluded to, and that he there assassinated his brother, whom he suspected of rivalry in regard to the lady he wished to marry, by stabbing him in the throat when asleep. That a few years afterwards, he assassinated in the same way the lady herself, whom he had married shortly after the murder of his brother. That he died at the age of 80 without having been called to account for these crimes, to which in that age of confusion and violence, but little attention was paid, and that since his death, he had constantly tried to do harm and had caused several accidents that had happened in the house. A seeing medium who was present at his first evocation saw him at the moment when those about him were trying to get him to write. He was shaking the medium's arm with great violence. His aspect was alarming, and he had on a shirt stained with blood and was holding a dagger. This was the first vision they had of him when he first appeared. Then I bring one of the last questions that it's on the book itself. When they finally are able to talk to him better and they can make him right, and he's more submissive and he's showing repentance. So this is after several sessions of evocation and several times talking to him and praying a lot for him. And then they ask, be kind enough to describe to us the situation in which you were before we called you for the first time. You may be sure that we ask this only as a means of being useful to you and not from any motive of curiosity. So then he answers, I have told you already that I had no consciousness of anything in the world but my crimes, and that I could only quit the house in which I had committed them to go up into space, where there was nothing around me but solitude and darkness. I cannot give you any idea of what it was like, for I never could understand it. The moment I rose up into the air, it was all blackness and emptiness. I cannot tell you what it was. At present, I feel much more remorse, and yet I am no longer compelled to remain in that fatal house. I am allowed to wander about upon the earth and go gain light from what I observe. But in doing so, I comprehend still more clearly the enormity of my wickedness, so that if I suffer less in one way, I suffer more in another because of my repentance. But at least I have hope. So this is one of the last questions that isn't present in the book about the spirit. And it is very interesting to see the change in the spirit. And in the end, they say that that medium that was able to see him in the first communication, that saw the shirt and the dagger in his hand, was able to see him and saw that he was no longer carrying the dagger in the end. But still, he was still with the shirt with blood. So now I'll keep going into the medium's book, and we can talk a little bit more about the case later if you have more questions, and we can discuss it. But Kardec will talk about some other things in here that we will see are related to that story. So one of the questions Kardec asks is, have haunted places in all cases been the former habitation of the spirits who haunt them? So in that case of the story, it was. But the spirit says, not in all cases. The former inhabitant may be an elevated spirit. He will no more hold to his old house than to his old body. Spirits who haunt certain localities when not attracted to them by sympathy for certain persons are often only actuated by caprice. So sometimes they're attached to places just by merely caprice. It's not anything in particular. Can they attach themselves to certain places in order to act as protectors of particular persons or families? Assuredly, if they are good spirits, but in that case, they never manifest their presence by disagreeable actions. So again, I'm going to mention why I brought the story of the Fairmont. And in that case, it's believed to be a good spirit. So you can have manifestations that lead to a belief that the place is haunted, but it is actually a good spirit in there. And to know the difference, what Spirit says is that you should judge how they manifest themselves. So in the case of the Costa notary, the manifestation was a slap. So it's clearly aggressive and it's clearly evil in nature. But many times the stories of spirits manifesting in the house, it can be good spirits trying to show that they're there to protect you. So it will depend a lot on what type of manifestation that you have. Is it rational to dread places that are reputed to be haunted by spirits? So should we avoid it? No, the spirits who haunt certain places and make disturbances there do so to amuse themselves at the expense of the credulous and the cowardly, rather than for any evil purpose. Besides, you must not forget that there are spirits everywhere, and that wherever you may be, you have them incessantly around you, even in the quietest houses. They only appear to haunt certain habitations because they find in them the conditions necessary for manifesting their presence. So in here, there are so many things in this only one paragraph. So one thing is, there are kinds of spirits that are called tricksters. They like to amuse themselves. They are not good or bad. They just like to trick people. So sometimes these spirits, they take their energy and their only objective is to amuse themselves by scaring us or scaring people around. When people show that they are not scared and they do not take it seriously, and they don't respond to them as they wish, sometimes they just go away because it's not amusing them anymore. The other thing is, there are spirits everywhere, and wherever you may be, and especially when we remember that the spirit starts saying that spirits have a preference for people or for other spirits. So we know we're surrounded by spirits all the time. So we have them around us. If we want to avoid a place that has spirits, maybe it's impossible. So there you are. You are surrounded by spirits all the time. It doesn't matter just because it's a different place. We should not be scared of it. And the last thing is that sometimes they find on those places the conditions necessary for manifesting their presence. And this is going a little bit more into mediumship. So we know that many times for spirit manifestation, we need to have a medium present so that there is this energy that they can use to manifest. either through, in case of mediums that transmit the message, they can use the spirit, the mediums ability of manifesting, or even their own bodies to transmit their message. But even the spirits that just make noises, they need the mediums or people with the capacity of interacting with them to be able to do those noises. So that's why sometimes people go into the haunted places and try to search for it and stay there, and sometimes they see nothing at all. There is no manifestation at all. So there's too many things in this one sentence or one paragraph from the spirits. And then Kardec asks, okay, is there any method of expelling them? Because in the case, for example, of Costa, it is an evil spirit. He has shown aggression towards people living in there. The father, Mr. D, that died because he saw the spirit manifesting itself in front of him and then passed away and all that. So in certain cases, you may want to expel the spirit. And that, if you remember the story of Costa, they tried to exorcise the spirit, but they had no success. So Kardec asks, well, if we want to, sometimes if they're evil, can we expel them? Yes, but most frequently what people do for that purpose attracts rather than repels them. The best way of expelling bad spirits is to attract good ones. By doing all the good you can, the bad ones will then go away, for good and evil are incompatible. Be always good, and you will have only good spirits about you. Then Kardec continues, many very good people, however, are greatly annoyed by the persecutions of bad spirits that can happen. You see, the person is a nice person, it practices good, but still they are persecuted by bad spirits. If persons thus annoyed are really good, the annoyance may be a trial to exercise their patience and to excite them to greater goodness. So it can be still a stimulus for them to get even better or exercise some patience towards the other spirits that are persecuting. And again, sometimes we are good people and still how we react to a spirit that it's persecuting us is not a good way of reacting to it. So sometimes what we need to do is learn to have sympathy for these spirits that are with us, even when they are not. Even if they are evil by intention, to be able to show charity and kindness toward these kinds of spirits. Can evil spirits be driven from haunted places by exorcism? So by exorcism is that you call a priest or a specialist in exorcism, you do a sequence of prayers and you do like holy water and all that. Have you often seen exorcisms successful? Have you not, on the contrary, often found that they increase the disturbances? Mischievous spirits are often amused at being mistaken for the devil. Spirits who come without any evil intention may also manifest their presence by rendering themselves visible or by noises, but the noises they make never degenerate into racket. They are often suffering spirits whom you may relieve by praying for them. They are sometimes kindly spirits who desire to show you that they are near you. Or they may be frivolous spirits who are only in sport. Since these who disturb you are almost invariably spirits in search of amusement, the best thing to do is to laugh at them. They will tire of playing pranks if they see that they neither frighten or vex you. So in here, they say, well, if it is a suffering spirit, such as the one in Castelnaudary, the best thing you do is pray for them. It is clearly a suffering spirit and is facing a difficult time, trapped in that house, seeing the same crime he committed over and over again. So the only thing that was able to help that spirit was, first, the group started praying for them, and they also asked the son of the man that died in the house to pray for the spirit as well. And then with time, with talking to the spirit and still praying for the spirit and praying for the spirit and convincing the spirit to accept the prayers and all that. So this is how you get free or release the spirit that is evil. If they're kindly spirits, would you like them to go away? I believe not. We would like more and more benevolent spirits coming near us and live with us. And the frivolous spirits, those that are tricksters that like to amuse themselves with us, then if you don't take them seriously, they will go away. You can also pray for them, right? Prayer is always recommended, right? For any situation. And it really helps, especially the spirits. So then, just to end my lecture, it's good with time. Then Kardec closes the chapter saying that from these explanations, we learn that there are spirits who attach themselves to localities. It is possible. And remain in them by preference without having any motive for manifesting their presence to us. Any place may be the sojourn of a spirit, either from a preference on his part or from its having been assigned to him as a temporary abode, without his ever producing a manifestation of any kind, and this even in the case of those who have led an evil life. So even for the evil spirits, they might be trapped to a place and they may never manifest themselves in there. The spirits who attach themselves to localities or to material things are never of superior advancement, but although not of a high degree, they are not necessarily wicked, nor animated by hostile intentions. Such inmates are sometimes even useful, for when they take an interest in the people of the house, they often render them various services. So they can even, by helping a spirit in there, you can make them help you or turn them into a good spirit on your side, right? So best way to deal, pray for the spirit if you are afraid. If you're afraid, try not to be afraid, because trickster spirits will have fun saying you're afraid of them, right? And if they're good spirits, great, bring your friends, bring more good spirits, right? So I will end my lecture today, and then we can open for questions and discussions.